Hey everyone, welcome to my video about just defining a few terms that I use in a few of my sewing videos. This is just a really quick and simple video, and we're just going to be looking at what I mean when I talk about the right and the wrong side of fabric, what bagging out means, and what I mean when I say a top stitch. And I just want to really quickly go through a few of the pieces of equipment that I use all the time. Now these, you can pick these up. I would encourage you to pick these up at a local haberdashery, but you can get these from your local supermarket if you really want to, so it should be really easy for you to get hold of all of these things. So the first things I use are a pair of dressmaker's scissors, and I use Fiskars, and I use Fiskars actually for my gardening tools as well. They're quite popular. And I've got a pair of embroidery scissors with a pointed tip, and I have had some with a rounder tip before, and I didn't like them very much because you can't get into the corners, and that's what I like to do. So I think these are slightly expensive, I'm not really sure, but don't go out and spend crazy money. You can, if you don't have any scissors, you can literally use any scissors you have at home that are going to cut thread. So yeah, don't go out and spend crazy money because you don't really need to. And then I either use a tailor's chalk, or this is an air erasable dressmaker's pen, which I tend to use all the time, but sometimes it fades really quickly on certain fabrics, which isn't great, so then that's when I use my tailor's chalk. But you can just use a pencil. So if you want to, you can use a pencil on the reverse side of your fabric as long as it doesn't show. So like I said, you can kind of start with anything you have at home. Don't go out and spend loads of money if you don't want to. And then, a stitch ripper or unpicker, which should come with your sewing machine, but you can probably pick these up from, I guess you could get these from your local supermarket. And then bobbins, so they should come with your sewing machine. So I have extra because I use quite a lot. And these are metal bobbins, but you can get plastic ones as well. But you should get a few of these with your sewing machine. And then, so pins, I tend to use the flower head pins because they're really good for pattern drafting. So I tend to find that when you use a, if I can find a straight one. So if I use a glass-headed pin, I tend to find when I'm pattern drafting that when I try to draw my seam allowance on, that the ruler won't sit flat on the pins. So these are really good for that, but they're not very strong. So they're not very good for fittings, for example. I do use these. Strong ones. But you can get whatever you can get, basically, use. And then I've just got this another pin cushion that I have on my sewing machine, which has just got a selection of beading needles, some larger needles that I use for adding bustles to wedding dresses, and then I've just got some household and some small embroidery scissors, but it's good to have a selection. Pin cushions as well, you can probably pick up anywhere, but you could make your own, so whether we do a video about that. Yeah, and then so tape measure, which is something that I think most people probably have, and again you can pick this up from your local haberdashery or supermarket. And so I do have a curve that I've had since college, so I don't know, 12 years, but it's really good for marking when you're pattern drafting as well, for marking armholes and nice curves. And it's also got a really good ruler here, so it's really easy to mark seam allowance. But don't go out, you don't necessarily need one of these. This is just what I use all the time and I've had since college. You could be really old school. If you've just got a ruler in your pencil case, just use that. So you could just use a pair of scissors that will cut thread, a pencil, and just your standard ruler. So they will be slightly more, they will be slightly less efficient, but it doesn't matter, you're just beginning. And I think that's kind of it really. Thread, so I tend to use Coats moon thread, or the other way around. No, I think it's Coats moon thread. And they're quite cheap, and they come with a good amount of colours. And then I tend to use a stronger thread for adding bustles and buttonholes and those sort of things. So those are kind of like the basic things to get yourself started. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on to the sewing. Let's start by looking at what I mean when I say right sides together. So you can see, so I've cut out 2 samples for us, and you can see that this fabric has a pattern on it. So this is the right side. Now if I turn this around, you can faintly see the pattern, but you can clearly see that this is the wrong side. When I say pin right sides together, what I mean is if we turn this back around to the right side, and this one to the right side as well, and we're gonna place right sides to right side, so I'm gonna pop this one on top and sandwich those 2 together. And I'm just gonna pin it so you can see that if I turn it up like this, you can see that's the right sides and they're right sides together. Let's move on to bagging out. So when I say bag out, or if you hear the phrase bagging out, all it means is you're going to sew a piece of fabric, usually right sides together, and you would sew all the way around the edge, but you would leave a section open so that you can pull it right sides out. So right sides out literally means so the fabric's on the right side, so you would see the pattern. And the phrase bagging out means pulling all of that fabric back out the right side. So let me pin, and I'll just show you what I mean. I'll pin here, and what I'm going to do is I will just leave this section here open to bag it out. So I'll carry on pinning around the edge. And I've already pinned these 2 sides. Let me pin them slightly closer. Nice wonky pin. Oh, I've got so many wonky pins I need to get rid of. I need to sift through them all. Right, so let's start by sewing this. So I'm going to pop this one under, and I'm just going to use a 1 cm seam allowance, but that's totally irrelevant, so ignore that. Let's start by doing a reverse stitch, just to secure that opening. I'm going to carry on to the end. I'm going to lift the foot up and I'm just going to turn it. And then I'm going to carry on to the end, and I'm going to make sure, so you can use the hand dial here to make sure the needle is going down into the fabric. And I'm going to lift that one up. So you might be able to see there, that's a 1 cm seam allowance. I didn't quite come in close enough to the edge for this side to be a 1 cm seam allowance. So when you're sewing, and obviously ignore me, although I'm telling you what you should be doing, this is what you shouldn't be doing. Make sure you sew 1 cm, that's probably about 1.5. So on this side I've managed to get about 1 cm. So if you do come to turn it around and you realise you're either not on the 1 cm marker or you're slightly over, all you want to do is go back to where you were, lift the reverse, and you're just going to reverse a couple of stitches. So I'm just going to do 1. Make sure that the needle's back in. That's better. So I'm at 1 cm on this side now. Lift up again, and so we're going to leave this section open that I've marked between the pins. So let's sew up to this point only, okay? And I'm going to do a reverse stitch just to secure it. I'm going to lift my needle, grab my scissors. So I'm just going to snip this here. So you might be able to see on my machine that I have a blade in here, but it doesn't always cut very well. And I have some other slightly more basic sewing machines that I use for workshops that don't have one of these. So I just use the scissors that I've mentioned in the beginning of this video. Okay, so I'm just going to pop the pins down, And then what you want to do is we're just going to snip into these corners here. And this just means that when we bag the fabric out, you're going to get a nicer point in the corner. You're not going to have all the bulk here. So you're going to snip in. When you do snip, you just want to make sure you don't snip too close to the stitching, otherwise it could start to fray and unravel. Let's bag this bad boy out. So I'm going to be pulling everything through the hole that we've left. So let me just snip those last few threads off. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. And all you're going to do is you're going to bag it out. So you're going to pull right sides out. What I would recommend is leaving the hole or the opening as small as possible. So when you come to finish it on the right side of the fabric, so either by using a neat slip stitch or just sewing directly on top of the fabric with a top stitch really close to the edge, you want the least. You want it to show the least, basically. So the smaller the opening, the less you're going to have to hand stitch or stitch on top of the fabric, and the less obvious it's going to be. So I'm going to go in with my scissors. I would actually recommend going in with an object that hasn't got a pointed end, because you can actually push the scissors through and rip your fabric. But I've done it a few times, so I'm just going to ease that gently through. Okay, so you can hopefully see that that has been bagged out. So there's the opening there and the opening there. And we're just going to finish this off. So I would normally slip stitch this, so you can't see, but we're going to make it really simple today. Ideally, what I'd like you to do at this stage, if you're bagging something out, is you're going to go and iron it so it's nicely pressed. You're going to iron that seam allowance in there, and then you're going to pop it under the sewing machine. And like a top stitch, you're going to sew as close to the edge as possible. Reverse stitch to start, and you're going to pop some tension on there. Just pull it slightly taut, just means you get a nicer finish. And we're going to whiz down. Yeah, snip off any loose threads. Hopefully you can see, but you're going to have something that looks like this. So this has been bagged out. So it's right sides, you can see, and I've just sewn a really simple stitch really close to the edge. Ideally you'd use a similar thread, but I've just used a contrasting thread, so hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. But if you can slip stitch that, just to make it, make the seam invisible, that would be fantastic, but you know, don't sweat it. It ain't no biggie. So that's bagging out. And now we're going to move on to what a top stitch is. I've pre-cut some calico here. Not all fabric has a right side and a wrong side. So this calico, you can use either side. But for today, let's just make it really obvious for us. So this is the right side. Don't you know it? I'm cool and awesome. These are the right sides, so right sides together. And I'm just going to pin, I need to get rid of these pins, and I'm just going to pin along this edge, like so. And I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. and using whatever seam allowance you like. Let's start with a reverse stitch. Finish with a reverse stitch. Gonna lift the needle, trim off any loose ends. Remove the pins. And let's just open that out so you can see. So this is the wrong side and you have the seam running along the center here. Hopefully you can see that. And we're just going to turn it right sides. Okay, so let me just pop that one back a bit. So I've turned that right sides together, and to top stitch, what you want to do is you're just going to push all of the seam allowance to one side. So I'm pushing everything to the right. So at this stage, what I want you to do is push everything to the right, and then I want you to press. So iron everything to the right so it's easier for you. Let's pop the fabric underneath, and you're going to place the needle as close to the edge as possible, but making sure that you're on the side of the fabric that you've pushed all the seam allowance into. And let's sew as close to the edge as possible. You might find it easier if you just pop some tension on the fabric and you pull it taut. And reverse stitch to finish. Let's snip those loose ends. So hopefully you can see that I have top stitched this edge here. And then you would just go and press that open. Okay, top stitch. Bagged out fabric. Welcome back everyone. So hopefully those really short tutorials or how-tos were easy for you to follow. Do refer back to this if you get stuck with any of the stages in my tutorials. And if you can leave any comments, like, subscribe, any advice you have for me, let's share our knowledge, people. And yeah, stay tuned for some more videos. Bye everyone.